two one-page documents. One of them is the ballot language for each constitutional amendment. This is what you will see when you go into the ballot box in November. You can see it is one sentence, maybe sometimes two sentences. So that's kind of the point of today's presentation, is to understand that. In the second document is called Business on the Ballot. This is a document from the Texas Association of Business, one of our partners that we work closely with. And this really is kind of the primary focus of what I will talk about today on the amendments, the propositions, which ones impact businesses. We are a Chamber of Commerce. Obviously, I want you all to know what all 17 of them are, so you're the informed voters. But in terms of where the Chamber stands on them, we will spend probably more time on these. And these are all propositions that TAB has taken a stance of support on. There's no stance on against from them. I haven't seen many business associations take a stance against any of the propositions. But again, I wanted you all to have that as background. So again, I'm gonna skip Prop 1 because that one does kind of affect one of our partners, San Antonio College there. So we'll jump ahead to Proposition 2, which I will read the ballot language and then go into an explanation. So as a reason on the ballot, it'll say the constitutional amendment prohibiting the imposition of a tax on the realized or unrealized capital gains of individual, family, estate, or trust. Many of you probably know what capital gains is, and Texas is one of 8 states maybe that does not have a state income tax, and that usually correlates with capital gains tax. Most states that have an income tax, by virtue of that, have a capital gains tax, and you don't have a state income tax, you don't. There have not been there's not been legislation to propose a capital gains tax in Texas. However, this is kind of a proactive stance by the legislature to constitutionally prohibit a capital gains tax in Texas. Kind of takes Texas another step further as a pro-business state to say, through businesses here, it's easier to hire workforce here because we don't have an income tax. Obviously, there are higher property taxes and other issues with that in Texas, but in terms of a state income tax, and then adding this, it would say Texas would never be able to have a capital gains tax barring the change of this constitutional amendment there. So that is the kind of the background and the reason for that, and the reason why TAB has taken a stance in favor of that, just again to keep Texas's pro-investment advantage there. I'll stop after each one. Just any quick questions on Proposition 2? All right. Proposition 3 reads, the constitutional amendment requiring the denial of bail under certain circumstances to persons accused of certain offenses punishable as a felony. Certain is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that, right? So I think it's important for me to read what these certain offenses are in that. So they are murder, capital murder, aggravated assault if the person caused serious bodily injury or used a firearm, club, knife, or explosive weapon, aggravated kidnapping, aggravated robbery, aggravated sexual assault, indecency with the child, trafficking of persons, or continuous trafficking of persons there. So right now the state constitution, wrong one. So there, right now a lot of left up to the judges, right? And we have seen in some cases Harris County has probably been the I would say the forefront, that's more of a positive term, has been maybe notorious this of violent offenders getting out on a lower bond than I think would most people would expect. And so this would sort of strip the judges, their purview and put this more in the Texas legislature and the constitutions, being able to get out on bail for these offenses. You'd not be able to do it. There are certain cases in which they would be able to. I'm not going to dive too deep on this one. I don't believe that this one is one related to business. Obviously, this is a deeply personal issue. I think for many people, right? If you've been victim of one of these, or someone who has, this might be something that would again be deeply personal to you. But that is the reason for it, is just to say that violent offenders can't get out as easy on bail. In some cases, not at all. Bail. So. Jumping to Proposition 4, which is one that Pasadena Chamber of Commerce has taken a lead on, or I guess has really followed the lead of many of our partner associations and being out of the forefront on being in favor of this. So it reads, constitutional amendment to dedicate a portion of the revenue derived from state sales and use taxes to the Texas Water Fund and to provide for the allocation and use of that revenue. So we've heard a lot about the Texas Water Fund and the need for water in Texas. So studies have suggested that $154 billion will be needed over the next 50 years to fully address water infrastructure concerns. This goes a long way to doing that. The legislature has already dedicated $5 billion from appropriations. If this constitutional amendment passes, then there will be $1 billion over the next 20 years will go to it. This comes from the state sales and use tax. So that's money that's expected taxes. Part of that would go to water infrastructure. We've seen Houston play a large role in gaining funding for projects to Houston. This is statewide, but obviously from economic development and recruiting projects to your state, having enough necessary water is going to be key in that, along with workforce there. So this is one that most business associations have taken a stance in making support of. Testing Chamber has as well, and I would expect that you'll continue to see a pretty large push from business, but as well as groups from around the state, and seeing that this one does get across the finish line. Any questions about the Texas Water Fund?
Let me just add one thing.
Please.
The way the $1 billion a year is going to be split up is a 50-50
Yes.
to new water sources and 50% to protecting old leaking water sources.
Right.
So it's going to be conserving as well as new.
Yes. Any other questions, comments? All right, Proposition 5 is the constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to exempt from ad valorem taxation tangible personal property consisting of animal feed held by the owner of the property for sale at retail. Doing a little research on this one, I got to admit I was not an expert in animal feed, so pretty much a city boy. So under current law, animal feed is not taxed at any point except when it is sitting in a store or store warehouse as inventory. So exempting animal feed held by retailers from property tax would reduce retailer costs and help make animal feed more affordable for Texas farmers and ranchers. So again, I don't know that there's a position to take on you. If there is, if anybody has a personal interest in animal feed, it seems pretty common sense to me that if it's not taxed at any other point across the life cycle, that it shouldn't be when it's inventory. We'll get to personal property tax later. It kind of falls in a similar vein. So any questions, comments, or expertise you can lend on this? Good, but so I'm happy for the farmers and ranchers, and hopefully by virtue that means for the customer as well, right? So Proposition 6 is a constitutional amendment prohibiting the legislature from enacting a law imposing an occupational tax on certain entities that enter into transactions conveying securities or imposing a tax on certain security transactions. Self-explanatory, right? No, not quite. So we all have likely heard that Texas legislature created the Texas Stock Exchange, which we know as TXE, as it's spelled out, TXSE. It is to compete with the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. To kind of combat that, the New York Stock Exchange decided that they also want to participate in Texas, so they're moving their Chicago branch to Texas. Both of those will be based in Dallas. Yeah, that is a good thing. So Texas is really trying to compete with New York and is well on its way because it received approval from the SEC for the Texas Stock Exchange to open up, which will likely happen in 2026. So this proposition really is to make sure that the Texas Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange, Texas, can be successful. That way people can put their money in these stock exchanges and then not obviously have to worry about this occupation tax. So this is something that again is supported by TAB and really is for investors and entrepreneurs to come to Texas and invest their money here in Texas there. So something that seems hard to understand by proposition when you just read ballot language, but really I think is a good thing for business in Texas. So any questions or comments on that? All right. Proposition 7, the constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to provide for an exemption from ad valorem taxation of all or part of the market value of a resident's homestead of the surviving spouse of veteran who died as a result of a condition or disease that is presumed under federal law to have been service connected. So this is one that is kind of more kind of backward looking. So back in 2022, there was a federal bill called the PACT Act that expanded eligibility for VA healthcare and benefits for veterans exposed to Agent Orange, burn pits, radiation, and other toxic substances, and created new presumptions for certain service-connected conditions. As a result, the surviving spouses of veterans who did not have 100% disability rating at the time of their death from service-connected causes had been excluded from receiving the property tax exemption. So this constitutional amendment will essentially say those families who have not had the benefit of receiving this tax exemption since 2022 when the PACT Act passed, now will have the benefit of it. So if a loved one died of Agent Orange, obviously it's probably the most popular one, they now will be able to get this tax exemption if this constitutional amendment passes, in which they hadn't been able to before 2022. So that's the goal of this constitutional amendment. This one is passed TAB does support this. They're saying reinforcing Texas as the nation's most military and family-friendly state. Obviously, we know military plays a huge role in Texas economy, and so that's TAB's position on it there. Any questions or comments about this? Happy, any veterans in the room, and certainly happy for them and the spouses should this pass. Proposition 8 is a constitutional amendment to prohibit the legislature from imposing death taxes applicable to a descendant's property or the transfer of an estate, inheritance, legacy, succession, or gift. So again, similar to the capital gains tax, there is not a push to pass a death tax in Texas. So this is more of a proactive piece of legislation. But really, this would guarantee heirs and beneficiaries to continue retaining the property and assets passing the loved one. Death taxes obviously can be burdensome. Many of the things that are taxed on a death tax, federal death tax, have already been taxed before, right? When the person was living. And so from a from position of a business, TAB states that this allows family businesses and farms to grow past the next generation. Family farms, ranches, that's really the big one impacted here. So that's kind of the goal is to just continue making Texas business friendly, family friendly place to live and be gone. So any questions on Prop 8? None.
Great.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay, so water. So,
City secretary, when you're just reading all the rest of it, breath, you're doing good. We're learning.
so I did my dream job. Prop 9, the constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to exempt from ad valorem taxation portion of the market value of tangible personal property a person owns that is held or used for the production of income. So I talked about the business for personal property a little earlier. That's what this bill does. So this was a bill that was championed by the Business Coalition. I know Texas Chemistry Council as well as TAB advocating for this. So right now there is a business personal property tax exemption up to $5,000 in Texas. This would raise it up to $125,000. Obviously, a pretty large jump. What this does is allow businesses that have a lot of inventory, or I guess really not inventory, but computers, a lot of expensive equipment that they have. Now they can write that off up to $125,000. So it allows these businesses to reinvest that money they were having to obviously pay taxes on. Now they can take that extra hopefully income and use that to their business there. So you can see that kind of the TAB says that cuts taxes and red tape, all businesses can reinvest and scale. That would one of the opponents would say is that counties, municipalities, special districts might have to raise taxes to cover these costs, but opponents or proponents of it say that really this is such a minimal piece of the tax roll, right? And allowing the exemption up to that. The small businesses are going to benefit a lot more than municipalities are going to lose by virtue of this proposition. So any questions and comments? I know we have some small businesses in the room. I don't know if anyone can speak to how this might positively affect them or negatively, if that matters. So. Yeah, that and Prop 4 were probably the two biggest pro-business pieces of legislation that are going to be on the ballot in November. So moving on to Prop 10, page. Constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for a temporary exemption for ad valorem taxation of the appraised value of an improvement to a resident homestead that is completely destroyed by fire. This is one that I think is a lot of common sense, and to kind of hit on that. I wrote down how they passed in the House and in the Senate, just to show kind of feedback there was. This proposition, when it was through the legislature, passed 31-0 in the Senate, 129-0 in the House. So there literally was no opposition. Essentially, if your house was appraised on January 1st, and then it burns down on March 1st, it allows you through the legislature to go in and say, no, that what it was appraised at is not what they're gonna have to pay taxes on, right? So for basically for 1 year, essentially exemption, if it becomes an habitable house becomes uninhabitable that way. So again, to me, it's fairly common sense why this would be passed in Texas. And then read this: no opposition to the proposed constitutional amendment was expressed during legislative consideration of the proposal. So if you want to be the one person to share opposition to that, I'll leave time now. But if not, we'll move to Prop 11. All right, Proposition 11, the constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to increase the amount of the exemption from ad valorem taxation by a school district of the market value of the residence homestead of a person who is elderly or disabled. Again, a lot of jargon, but right now there is I ran the page. So right now the homestead exemption for elderly disabled is $10,000. This would raise it to $60,000. So I talked about how the House and Senate felt on Prop 10. On Prop 11, it passed 31-0 in the Senate and 145-0 in the House. So again, no opposition really from the legislature. There was more opposition from the public there, who talked about this this isn't the best way to lower property taxes, right? Compression versus this, and would that be a better way? The homestead exemption for elderly disabled go up, and obviously a lot of times those are more vulnerable populations, right? Who may have a more difficult time paying their property taxes. So there is that the TAB does take a stance in favor of this one. Again, just showing that this is pretty common sense as the legislature did by putting names on that. So any questions or comments on Prop 11? All right, move on to Prop 12, constitutional amendment regarding the membership of the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, the membership of the tribunal to review the commission's recommendations, and the authority of the commission, the tribunal, and the Texas Supreme Court to more effectively sanction judges and justices for judicial misconduct. Not a lawyer, never wanted to be a lawyer, certainly not a judge, but I will do my best to try to explain what this means. So there is, you can see something called the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. Right now, the membership of that is kind of split up in several different ways. The State Bar of Texas gets to appoint a couple of attorneys on that. There's a few other appointments that are done by that. What it would do is would modify the composition to where essentially 13-member board, I think it's 6 of them would be appointed by the Texas Supreme Court, 7 of them would be appointed by the governor. The Texas State Bar obviously is not an elected position, right? That's to kind of do their own thing. The goal of this legislative effective is to increase the transparency of it and increase the ability of the voters to have a say in it, because voters get to elect the Texas Supreme Court and the governor, and so these people are appointed for that. That is the application there. There is a lot of kind of legal jargon and oversight that goes into that, and talks about how the commission's recommendations of complaint, misconduct, how they'll go about through that. I'm not going to dive into that because again, I just don't think this is a business issue. I know obviously there are business courts and things that for the business they go to Texas Supreme Court, but the composition of the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, I think, is a little bit outside purview of this chamber. But happy to hear any questions or comments on that. All right, moving on to Proposition 13. Constitutional amendment to increase the amount of the exemption of residence homesteads or ad valorem taxation by a school district from $100,000 to $140,000. So this is the broader tax exemption, so it doesn't apply only to a certain select population. This goes for anyone who owns a house, obviously, or your particular homestead, so it would go from $100,000 to $140,000. There, I want to highlight this point from a comment by supporters. The state would make up any loss of local school district taxes as a result of the higher exemption by using general revenue under state aid formulas provided in current law and the enabling legislation. So the school finance bill, the state is trying to kind of make this into a formula by saying this property tax exemption passes. The state is already putting their surplus funds into the school finance bill to make sure that they cover the cost of the money lost by people writing this off through their homestead exemptions. So this one was also unanimous in the House and Senate, 30-0 and 143-0. So again, the legislature is pretty in favor of raising homestead exemptions. It's a popular thing, it helps you get reelected, I would say. So any questions or comments about this bill or this proposition?
Is there a move towards no taxes at all? Because I'd really vote for that.
You would do, yeah.
Until all the effects.
Yeah, right. I'm sure you find a candidate who would run on that platform. Prop 14, constitutional amendment providing for the establishment of the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas, establishing the Dementia Prevention and Research Fund to provide money for research on and prevention and treatment of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and related disorders in the state, and transferring that fund $3 billion from the state general revenue. I will say TAB is in favor of this one. When you think about it from a business perspective, the goal is to attract and recruit researchers to kind of become the leading state on funding or on researching dementia and Alzheimer's. This is a growing disease as the population gets older in our country, especially our state. We're starting to see dementia and Alzheimer's grow, but we're also starting to see it in younger populations as well. I know the National Institute of Health has declared a public health crisis. They talk about the bill talked about $3 billion in state revenue. We have seen similar examples of this with the Cancer Prevention Research Institute of Texas that passed several sessions ago. That was put from the Lieutenant Governor. This is kind of his next step in doing that, trying to again invest in Texas and have the research on cancer and dementia. Texas be a leader on that. So that's why TAB is taking a position in support of it. Happy to hear any questions or comments on this one in particular. No. All right.
Rob, do you want to go back and catch Prop 1, Christians in the room?
Yeah, I was gonna go back at the end, but we can go there now. So we can wait till we do it. Then you're saying that's fine. Okay. 15, 16, 17 shouldn't take terribly long. There's not a whole lot of business aspect in them. So Proposition 15, constitutional amendment affirming that parents are the primary decision makers for their children. As I was in a meeting this morning, someone said, we have to have a constitutional amendment for this. Yeah, we do. So again, this would, the proposed amendment would provide an express constitutional guarantee of these generally recognized rights and responsibilities. So you know, for generally recognized, this puts in the Constitution that says the parents are the primary decision makers for their children and nobody else. So the opponents would be people that say that doesn't protect children's rights. So I think that's if there's hangups there, but I think this one is generally going to pass. Yeah, I'm just reading what. As a parent to a 9-year-old, I'm not particularly worried about their rights at bedtime or anything else. So
it's a vote check. They want to see how many people are participating in these kind of things. So they can kind of count the state of Texas if they want to pass anything else in future legislative sessions. That's what it's for.
So Proposition 16, the constitutional amendment clarifying that a voter must be a United States citizen. I think this one similar with vote check there. Obviously that you have to be United States citizens to vote in the United States, but there's nothing right now in the Texas Constitution that states that. So that would be added there. So I have not a whole lot else to really add on that. And then finally, Proposition 17, constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for an exemption from ad valorem taxation of the amount of the market value of real property located in a county that borders the United Mexican States that arises from the installation or construction of the property, on the property of border security infrastructure and related improvements. So people that allow the government to put, or government comes in purchases that say, hey, we're gonna order infrastructure, they'll now be able to write this off as property tax exemption. I think the goal is obviously to incentivize landowners, on the border to let the government more easily take their land and let's purchase their land in order to invest in order. So again, I don't think it's bad. Headed back to Prop 1, in the room, I know, talked a little bit about this one. So